Hey folks, have you ever picked up an RPG book that made you stop and think and you're like, what the hell is this? So back in the early 90s, I was already deep into AD&D. I knew fantasy, I knew elves, dragons and dungeons and dwarves. I thought I had a pretty good idea of what role-playing games were supposed to look like. And then I opened up Rifts. My brain just went like that. No, I'm not kidding. It was one of those games that when I grabbed the books, I went and really beyond and grabbed the books. So, and yeah, my brain actually went, "Oof, this is awesome." This wasn't just another fantasy game. It wasn't another science fiction game. It was almost everything. One page, you'd see a knight in shining armor riding a horse. You turn the page, and there's a guy in a 20-foot power armor carrying a railgun. Flip another page, and then there was a dragon, then a cyborg, then a wizard, a vampire hunter, a robot. And somehow the game expected all these characters to exist in the same world all at once. At the time, I've never seen anything like it. Probably most people haven't. What really grabbed me was the setting itself. It really wasn't simply post-apocalyptic. Well, that was cool. It was beyond post-apocalyptic. Humanity had already destroyed itself. A nuclear war wasn't even the biggest disaster. According to the setting, the massive loss of life released incredible amounts of psychic energy throughout the land. That surge awakened the ancient ley lines that crisscrossed the earth, tore open these dimensional rift holes, and let these countless number of weird creatures pour in. And that idea alone was like, So magic really didn't replace technology. Technology didn't replace magic. They kind of went. One town might have laser rifles. The next might be defended by these wizards the next could be ruled by demons. Anything felt possible. And then there were the ley lines. I've heard of ley lines before in fantasy books, but Rifts made them feel like something more than what it's like glowing rivers of lines. I know they're like glowing rivers of mystical energy stretched across the entire planet, where some of them actually formed some type of nexus when they crossed and dramatically increased magical powers, letting spellcasters kind of siphon off extra, as they call PPE in the game. Potential psychic energy, I believe it's called, to strengthen their spells and sometimes even open these bigger rifts. It just blows your mind. And as a young gamer, that was friggin' cool. I wanted to, playing adventures built around these things constantly. I wanted to know what would come crawling out of the rift next, and the only thing that held you back was your imagination. So then we had some things about character classes, which in Course in Palladium was called OCCs, or occupational character classes. That's what they wanted to call them. And then there was a lot of them. There were so many things you could choose. You can be like this glitter boy pilot inside one of the most iconic suits of power armor ever designed in Palladium history. You could play a juicer guy that was chemically enhanced, like a super soldier, who was so fast and so strong and deadlier than almost anything else. There was a catch about playing, though, and it was really brutal. The drugs that made you into a living weapon slowly were killing you. So you were kind of, in a sense, like a ticking time bomb that, by taking all these drugs, was going to make you, you explode pretty much. Your heart just go, and you're dead. But the trade-off was you had all these great abilities. You could be like this basic average city rat just trying to survive in the ruins and trying to collect things. Then you had cyber knights wandering the wasteland with a code of honor. And then you had your geniuses like the rogue scholar, a wilderness scout, a burster who can control fire, or even a full conversion cyborg with most of your humanity replaced with machinery. The choices in Rifts felt like absolutely endless. And coming off of AD&D, where your decisions were usually fighter, cleric, magic user, thief, paladin, if you were lucky enough to qualify, this was like level here and then all the way off the screen. It made every class feel like the main character of its own movie, and then we can get into weapons. If you grew up playing fantasy games like me in the 80s, your equipment list probably ended with longsword, battle axe, longbow, whatever. RIFTS looked at that list, threw it on the ground, stomped on it, laughed at it, pooped on it, and made its own weapons. Laser rifles, particle beams, plasma cannons, railguns, missile launchers, chainsaws, energy swords. Power armor carrying weapons that look like artillery pieces that you would only dream of. The illustrations in the book made every piece of equipment feel alive and dangerous. You wanted to read every single entry and every single page, and Palladium was very good at filling in information as far as background and what things were. And you really wanted to know what each weapon did when you read them, even if you never used them whatsoever in the game. And then I haven't talked about dragons. Yeah, they had dragons. Not monsters, but as player characters. That alone changed how me and probably thousands, maybe even millions, I don't know, maybe not millions, but thousands of gamers looked at this game. Until then, dragons had always been something you fought. I believe in second edition they had some half dragons, maybe deep-blooded dragons. Not a second edition player, I don't know. But in RIFTS, you could basically just be one. It was the first game that really made me realize that there didn't have to be limits on player imaginations. Whatever you really wanted was ever really possible. If the setting supported it, of course, and why not? Of course, there was one thing that everybody always talked about when it came to RIFTS, anything with Palladium, and that's balance. Or maybe the complete lack of balance. You can have... And when I'm talking about balance, and I'm not talking about making things fair as far as fights and everything, I'm talking about you can have one player carrying a normal pistol running across the battlefield, and another one with a giant robot, and another one casting devastating spells, and another one's a dragon. On paper, that sounds like an impossible mess to run. And honestly, sometimes it probably was. But back then, we really didn't spend hours arguing about game balance on the internet. In fact, no one really did. No one that I knew. We mostly thought, yeah, sounds awesome. And I say it in that voice because that's how we all sounded. Now, looking back at this with a few decades of gaming behind me, more than like a ton of decades behind me, I do see flaws in the game. The rules are a little clunky. They are smooth if you get used to it. But new players will see it as clunky and annoying, I think. Some mechanics were buried in places you weren't expected to find, and that's what I really hated about a lot of Palladium books, is that a lot of the rules were all over the place. And then sometimes the rule wasn't even there. Like, they'd have the rule, they'd talk about it, and then you look for it and it wasn't even there because they forgot to put it in there. Character power could vary wildly in the game, and there were moments where you'd stop and ask, wait a minute, how do these things work together? But here's the thing, none of that mattered me when I was like, 14 or 15 playing this game. Because every time I opened that book, my imagination took over. I wasn't thinking about balance. I wasn't comparing damage curves, and I wasn't worried about math or making sure everything was super fair. I was wondering what the next rift was going to rip open and what thing I can throw through it at the players. That's something I think a lot of modern games kind of miss these days. They explain everything for you and hand everything for you. Rifts was just like, here's the book, good luck. And that's basically how it was. It threw ideas at you so fast that your brain had to fill in the gaps. And my brain, the way it works, this friggin' game was actually perfect. Every page made you think of another adventure, another villain, another character, another place to explore. The artwork helped for the most part. There was a lot that was really good and a lot that was hit or miss. Kevin Long's illustrations were everywhere, and they were great. They gave the world a very, I want to say, distinct look. You knew every piece of RIFTS art the moment you saw it. those huge, like, shoulder cannons and things like that, the battered armor, the oversized weapons, and the strange mix of medieval science fiction, horror, and fantasy all rolled into this one ball. And it all worked. Even today, I can flip through this book and recognize pieces of artwork I haven't seen in such a long time. That really says something. They're memorable. I also think that the timing had a lot to do with it as well. The early 90s were, I guess, full of imagination. Comic books were getting bigger and more grand and more experimental. Video games were rapidly changing, and movies were pushing special effects, well, at least new special effects every year, further and further. Then came along a role-playing game that basically says, all right, sure, you have dragons over here fighting against a robot, against a vampire, while this wizard over here is in the back casting a spell in the middle of this post-apocalyptic wasteland area. A teenager would be like, yes, how could you not love that? Did we play every rule correctly? No, certainly not. Absolutely not. Did we accidentally ignore rules? Probably. Did we make up things as we went along? Absolutely. You cannot play Palladium without making something up. But we always had a blast playing it. And honestly, that's what I remember the most, not the dice rolls or statistics, and not whether we calculated every modifier correctly. I remember sitting around the table with friends looking through the giant book, pointing at pictures, saying, yeah, I'm going to play that guy. I want to play this. Yeah, I want this in my game. Can I have this? And that's what Rifts gave to me. It reminded me that role-playing games are supposed to spark your imagination first. Everything else comes after. There's still quite a few people playing Rifts today. You can find them on Facebook, Reddit, online places on X, whatever. People still play Rifts today. I don't personally play Rifts these days. I don't have a group that wants to play Rifts. I would love to play Rifts. No one wants to play it because they're so afraid of the rules. And of course, Palladium is still pumping away to this day. And they just, in fact, were announced a whole bunch of new books, new source books. And new fans are starting to discover this new batch of books coming out. And Palladium is actually stepping up with their new ownership and their new style of books that I think it may push itself into the stratosphere of being in the top 3. Maybe. I don't know. And I think that's pretty remarkable, to be honest. Very few role-playing games have stayed in print for decades while keeping the same core identity. Now, whether you love these rules or struggle with the mechanics or house rule half the book, which a lot of people do, you know you're playing Rifts. You know you're playing Palladium for the most part. It has a personality of its own. For me, that's what keeps bringing me back to Palladium. Every so often, I pull a book off the shelf, Palladium Fantasy or Heroes Unlimited, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I flip through those pages and I'll stop at a piece of artwork, read a paragraph, look at a class, and suddenly I'm this little kid again and remembering the games that we played in my friend's basement for hours on end, wondering what type of adventure would be next. And that's kind of a special feeling. There aren't many games that could do that after 30-something years. Now, if you've never played Rifts, I hope this gives you a little glimpse into why so many of us were hooked the first time when we opened that book. And if you were there in the 90s when this was around, you probably remember exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe, hopefully. Love to hear your stories on that. What was the first thing in Rifts that made you stop and say, I've never seen anything like this before? What's a glitter boy? You know, where dragons, ley lines, giant robots. What was it? Tell me. Drop it in the comments. I've got a feeling we're going to see some pretty cool stories here in the comments. And who knows? Maybe I'll grab my Rifts book and do more videos on it if you want. And maybe, you know, that's a good reason why I should. Because Rifts did, at the time, really kind of revolutionize the hobby for the most part. It wasn't because it had the best rules. It wasn't because every mechanic was well balanced, and it wasn't because every answer was easy to find, because I can tell you that it wasn't. It was because it made you think and dream. I know that sounds corny, but it is. It made me want to create characters, build adventures. It made me want me to sit around the table with my friends and ask the big question of what if? Now, looking back, I think that's the mark of a great role-playing game. Now, whether every rule is perfect or not, doesn't matter. But whether decades later you still remember how it made you feel the first time you opened that book, RIFTS did that for me. It reminded me that role-playing games don't have to fit into neat little boxes. It can be messy and over the top and crazy gonzo. Throwing dragons, power armor, demons, aliens, and giant robots into the same bowl, mixing it around, and handing you a spoonful of it to play a game. And that was enough to make me a fan for life. I have tons of books of Palladium that goes beyond enough books of Palladium. So if you've really enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments below. Tell me your stories. Do you want to see videos on RIFTS, Palladium Fantasy, Heroes Unlimited, or any of the other Palladium universe? Just let me know, and I will dedicate a video at least once in a while to Palladium while I'm doing my normal D&D videos. I know everybody loves... Whoops, sorry about that. Everybody loves the D&D videos, but sometimes it's nice to just look at some other things. So until next time, I'm going to say keep it original, keep it old school. Good night. God bless everybody.
You've been listening to Railguns and Dragons Reborn, a podcast about RIFTS. Head over to railgunsanddragons.com for more information.